Welcome back, all you RL Jackie, with a continuation, if you want to say, of last week's video. By the way, before we get started, that video was supposed to come out Wednesday evening, but I forgot YouTube, when scheduling the video, automatically picks the date after the day after to upload the video. So that's why it was uploaded on Thursday and not Wednesday. But here we are. Hopefully this goes up Wednesday evening now. We got a little bit of a continuation. Last week we talked about the founding of the NFL in the early 1920s, left you off in 1922. And I told you that the NFL was the king of professional football for a while. There were other leagues that popped up to try to challenge, but they never really could. And that was until 1960 when the old AFL, the American Football League, rose to challenge the NFL for that top spot. Now, this video is not going to go over totally what the AFL was. There were rule changes that happened. There were TV deals that happened, the contracts, the draft battle. There was a lot of stuff that happened from 1960 when the AFL was founded to 1966 when it merged with the NFL. A lot of stuff happened, and there's a lot of backstory with the owners. But I gotta save content for later, you know what I mean? Especially the draft. That's probably going to be my video in April. I can't be giving y'all all the information right now. But what we are going to do is we're going to talk about what exactly happened to found the AFL, how exactly they challenged the NFL, and what went down in order for them to agree to a complete merger. So let's get into it. So there's two people that you really need to focus on when it comes to the AFL. There was Bud Adams, who was a Houston oil man down in old Texas, and a trust fund baby. That feels a little disrespectful, but his wealth came from his family. Lamar Hunt, who I believe was also an oil guy in Texas. These two men loved football to death, and they pitched to the NFL to bring an expansion team down to Dallas. Now, at the time, the NFL wasn't really keen on moving to Texas or expanding outside of the little group that they had, so they rejected their pitch into bringing a team to Dallas, which is weird because the Dallas Cowboys came around in 1960, the same year the AFL was founded. So why Lamar Hunt's team was the Dallas Texans, as we'll get into. He got a team in Dallas, so maybe that was the NFL's attempt at they're in Dallas, it's a big market, so we'll throw a team down there. I don't know, but what I do know is Bud Adams and Lamar Hunt left the meeting with the NFL, and I believe it was Pete Rozelle at the time, upset that they couldn't get a team. So they left the meeting saying, okay, you don't want us in the league? We'll make our own and take you down. So a year or two later, they form what is known as the Foolish Club. And this club was just a bunch of billionaires that found it foolish to try to go against the NFL and the professional football landscape, but we're going to do it anyway. So let me give you a rundown, and again, I have to look at my notes, and I apologize for that, but we have Bud Adams, who was the Houston Oilers, now the Tennessee Titans. We have Lamar Hunt with his Dallas Texans that moved to Kansas City and became the Chiefs. We got Harry Wismer, who made the Titans of New York, who later became the New York Jets. We had Bob Howsam, who was owner of the Denver Broncos. We had Baron Hilton, who was the owner of the LA Chargers. Ralph C. Wilson, owner of the Buffalo Bills. Billy Sullivan, who was the owner of the New England Patriots. And then they also had Max Winter, who was going to add the Minnesota Vikings into the AFL, but the NFL kind of pulled him to the side, and the Minnesota Vikings became part of the NFL. Now, that team was replaced by a group of about 8 investors who formed the Oakland Raiders. So, the original AFL teams in 1960 were the Houston Oilers, the Dallas Texans, the Titans of New York, Denver Broncos, I said LA Chargers, it was the San Diego Chargers, the Buffalo Bills, the New England Patriots, and the Oakland Raiders. And then the league was so successful that they added 2 more teams with the Miami Dolphins in 66 and the Cincinnati Bengals in 68. Let me make this clear. When you think of the AFL NFL merging, I think what comes to your brain, because what came to my brain, I might just be stupid, but what came to my brain is, well, the NFL wasn't going to last long, so the NFL decided to kind of swallow it. Kind of what happened with the territories in professional wrestling, how all the territories were pretty much going out of business because Vince McMahon was just buying their talent and TV deals, so Vince just ended up swallowing them. I thought it was something kind of like that, but it really wasn't. If the NFL and AFL never merged in 1968, or 66, they merged in 66. If they never merged in 1966, we would have two professional football leagues, both playing in the fall. They both were successful in their own right, but the NFL was off and going. Now, the first couple of years, they were plagued with what usually plagues startup leagues: poor attendance, no real TV deal. Player salaries were, what player salaries were. Not what they are at all today, but they were still pretty high. But how they survived for the first couple of years is how people really think AEW is surviving. I know AEW is not public, but how people believe AEW is surviving, and that is you have owners that are completely and willing to be in the red, completely willing to pour as much money into this to keep it afloat until it could probably be profitable. That is happening right now with AEW. Again, just a theory. And that happened with the AFL. And really, they had the benefit of having all these teams have stupid wealthy owners. One fact you need to know about the NFL and the AFL owners, on average, were a lot more wealthy than the NFL owners. That's why the contracts became such a thing. Contracts kept getting higher and higher and higher up until Joe Namath signed about a $450,000 contract, which at that time people were like, what? It's because the AFL, the owners had money and they were willing to spend the money to put the NFL into the ground. So the first couple of years led up till 1965. In 1965, the AFL really started rocking. Attendance was just growing. They got 2 TV deals with NBC and ABC, which, by the way, they really introduced to the NFL how to really do TV packages. They really, to correct myself, they had TV deals with ABC and NBC, but not at the same time. ABC, they had it from 1960 to 64, and then NBC 65 and forward. But they revolutionized how these TV deals would work. Basically, this one station just gets all of their product. But starting in 1965, the AFL starts making a lot of money, getting a lot of fans, and it really puts the NFL on notice. And then they start stealing players from the NFL. Not directly. There's a whole controversy in terms of signing players that had active NFL contracts. That was a thing down the line. But in terms of the draft, they got a couple guys away from the NFL that they were not supposed to get. All of it leading up to Joe Namath. Joe Namath is the most popular one. Joe Namath, I believe, was drafted by... No. Dick Butkus was drafted by the Broncos, and that wouldn't make any sense because Joe Namath signed with the AFL and he wasn't a Broncos quarterback. Joe Namath was drafted by the Jets. I forget which NFL team he was drafted by, but he was drafted by the Jets. He was the most highly sought after college football player. And by the way, if you go watch a Joe Namath documentary, they will tell you that Joe Namath had a knee injury in college when he was playing at Alabama, and he was just never the same quarterback after that. But he was still a Hall of Fame level quarterback, at least in that time. Go watch some of his college highlights. They're not wrong. But coming up to 1966, the NFL realized that the AFL was a competitor, and they were there to stay. They were just getting more and more ground in the field of professional football. So a couple of the NFL owners, including Tex Stram, owner of the Dallas Cowboys, hell of a name for a Texan running the Dallas Cowboys. Much better than Jerry Jones. But they decided to sit down with a couple of the owners from the AFL and talk about a merger. Now, why did they want to merge? Well, they thought that everybody would just be making more money if it was under one roof. That's it. This competition that they were having, it was splitting apart the market share. It was splitting apart TV deals. It was splitting apart player salaries and also players were starting to demand more money. I'll just go to the AFL if you don't give me more money. And to these guys, no, they can't be having that. We're billionaires. We need more. How dare these greedy fucking pig NFL players who play for us, we put them on the field. How dare they ask for more money? Am I right? So the AFL agreed, and they merged in 1966. Not officially. I think officially it took until like 69 for the AFL to fully form into the NFL, but it was pretty much done in 1966. And fun little fact, the AFL is the only major U.S. sports league to ever merge with another without losing any franchises. Every single football team that the AFL had, the Bengals, Chargers, Dolphins, Oilers, I'm trying to do this without reading my notes, Chiefs, I think I already said Raiders. Every team merged into the NFL. None of them folded. And now we have the league we have today. Now, the original plan, I believe, was to do like the NFC is the NFL and the AFC is the AFL. But of course, the AFL didn't have really enough teams. And plus, the NFL still expanded with, the Texans and the Panthers and the Jaguars and whatever. So it wasn't totally perfect. They had to add some teams to the AFC to make it balanced. But we're here today. It's the sport we enjoy, the league we enjoy. Everything worked out in the end. But honestly, the AFL was revolutionary in several aspects. And we'll get to that whenever I decide to make a full breakdown of the AFL and really dive deep into their lore and everything they revolutionized and, all the owners and all that. We'll dig deep into that. But genuinely, competition is just better. We have a lot of problems with the NFL, especially at the top when it comes to Roger Goodell and how he hands down punishments or how players are treated in this situation or that. If we had another league that was doing, if not as well, close to as well as the NFL, I don't know, man. That would seem like a fun little thing to be in. So they try spring football, but it's never going to work. And of course, the NFL is too big now to have any real competition anymore. So I guess that dream's just dead. But yeah. To tack onto this, by the way, my favorite little fact about the merger. Y'all know Al Davis. He was the head coach of the Raiders when they formed in the AFL. And in 1966, he became the commissioner, and he wanted to kill the NFL. Go read any book about Al Davis. Go watch any documentary about Al Davis. He wanted to put the NFL in the ground. So the rest of the owners went behind his back. No one mentioned to Al Davis that the leagues were merging. He found out through the newspapers, I believe, that the leagues were officially merging. And he went back to being the owner of the Oakland Raiders. I don't think he went back to head coach at that point, but he just said, fuck that. I'm never managing again if that's what y'all are going to do to me. And people wonder why he was such a villain in the NFL. It's because that happened. But let me know what y'all thought. Throw in the comments what y'all thought. Throw in the comments something that you'd want me to cover and dive deep into. I'm just going to get better at doing these. I really enjoy doing the research. So, yeah. Go follow the TikTok RL Jackie. I post there sometimes. Go check out the podcast that comes out every Monday, Red Light Homies, to see me talking about whatever, playing a game, or whatever me and Z decide to do. And yeah, y'all take care.